Welcome, everyone, to the Real Geek podcast, where we discuss the financial state of the world by providing insight and data. I'm your host, Johnny Garcia, founder and president of the Real Geek Incorporated, which has been helping clients with all their real estate and mortgage needs since 2019. We hope our show provides a little clarity about big issues. After all, it's just math and science. Also, don't forget to subscribe and drop us a like. Now, on to the show. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Real Geek Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Garcia. And as always, I got my co-host, Mr. Ron Davison and Dr. Yang Hu here with me. And this week's episode, we're going to talk about something that Mr. Davison had brought up and I thought was quite interesting and relevant right now. And that is the baby boomers and what that means for housing and just wealth in general, or the transfer of wealth in general. So, hey guys, and by the way, Mr. Davison is joining us from Austria, so thank you very much.
Yes.
Yang, you're in Irvine, so I'm not going to thank you. All right, guys. So, Ron, you had brought up this good point, and we have the largest amount of baby boomers heading into retirement, and the number of inheritances is starting to increase as well. So I actually found this little article here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I found this one. This one is from, I believe, last year. So let me look at the date here. Yeah, July 2021. But I thought it was an interesting one, right? So,
So it's a stunning stat there. Basically, 150% of the net worth, people 70 and older have.
As a share of US GDP.
Yeah. And
so it's not a proportion of wealth. It's as divided by US GDP.
Got it.
Which kind of makes sense.
More sense.
Which kind of makes sense that the ratio will go up because you have a very giant bulge of that population retiring, and so the that's gonna naturally slow down the pace of growth of GDP. So that ratio is gonna this isn't and the baby boomers may have a disproportionate share of wealth relative to other generational cohorts, but this chart by itself is just saying that you have this giant bulge that's retiring, and it's going to that's going to drive up the ratio.
So would the wealth of the baby boomers increase in proportion to GDP because most of their portfolio would be in a 401k or some kind of retirement account that is kind of directly, or I should say indirectly, tied to GDP or the performance of corporations in general? Or is that too separated to make that kind of assumption?
Oh, yeah. You know what? I think that's going to be a hard call because increasingly their 401k isn't just tied to the US economy. So if their stocks, so I'll give you an example that if you look at the Nike 10Ks, their big growth area at least 2-3 years ago was China. Their so their growth potential, their revenue growth potential in North America is more or less saturated. And so to the extent that there's growth in their 401k, a lot of them is going to come outside the US.
Interesting. I'd be interested.
One of the things too that's so kind of remarkable about this 1970s, most people retire with a pension. And one of the ways that leads to more equity in wealth is that if you died at 62, you don't tap another dime. If you make it to 102, you pull out all the time. But once you're gone, there's no residual, right? The pension's over. By contrast, we've gone from fixed payout in the form of pensions to more and more fixed pay in, where people buy 401k shares. And of course, you've got variation in the returns, huge variations, luck, skill, all these things that factor into that. And what that ends up meaning is now, if you die at 62, you're going to leave your heirs an enormous amount of money if you've done well. If you haven't done well, you aren't even going to make it to 65 because you don't have enough to live off of, right? And so the pensions, which kind of were part of that great equalizer, kind of post FDR into about late 70s, we've gone to exacerbating the differences in wealth. And now, if you look at the top 1%, they're close to a third of the wealth, and the bottom 1% is pretty close to 2% total. Like, bottom 50%, right? They're just, there's no wealth there. And so one of the things that's happened is and I liken it to the creation of goods. So there was a point in history where they'd invented the car and only the elites had it. Very, very few percentage. Then if you look at Ford, his amazing kind of transformation of the production process, when he first debuted the Model T, I want to say that it sold for like $800 and some dollars. And then within a decade, it had fallen to $280. And what that meant was we popularized consumption of goods. These things that were reserved for elites, suddenly the average guy could have them. And that was a huge inflection point in history for quality of life and quantity of goods. My own feeling is one of the things that we need to do, and it's a big theme for me, the popularization of entrepreneurship involves letting more people use corporations as a means to create wealth. And what that could mean is a similar kind of popularization of wealth creation, similar to what this, economic goods to have. So again, cars, it's for the elite. Now, far more common. Right now, wealth, in a sense, really is for the elite. And I think one of the things we need to do is find ways to make that more common and distribute that more widely, because this is part of what drives the inequality.
Well, let me ask you a question. Me being from a generation that has never used or even known or been offered a pension, is that similar to a 401k in the sense that, am I paying monthly into this pension, and is it growing like a 401k does? Is it being invested, or is
No.
it's
all
benefit
invisible
that
to
I
you.
get back at the end?
Yeah, so essentially it's invisible to you. And so what happens is companies pay into a fund, they've got a contract with you, and it gets updated over time. But the punchline is, if you work till 62, we'll give you this amount per month. If you work till 65, we'll give you this amount per month. And the company is on the hook for that, right? And so one of the many reasons that they went over to the 401k is you're on the hook for providing for your own retirement. They might contribute 50% match for every dollar or whatever, but they have no liability in terms of, we got to come up with, $3,500 a month for Johnny, and our investments didn't do well, and we can't do that. So the pension was a big deal, particularly for these industries that lost more and more workers. So you had fewer and fewer people paying into that, right? So
it's basically an insurance program. Then
it's like Social Security.
The
younger, like Social
yeah,
Security.
Yeah, basically the newer guys are subsidizing or paying for the guys who retired.
Depends on how much you capitalize the system.
Right.
So there's no, it doesn't have to be.
But what happens if the business goes out, or if the company goes out of business?
And there's one of the many reasons that they shifted over to 401ks. Yeah.
So in that case, this is where you get really complicated. So if it's something that goes into like a Chapter 7 and liquidation, then you have to line everybody up, and there's a whole line of who gets whatever is left in the pot, so on and so forth. And this is where if you're underfunding your pension, then then the people who are supposed to get the pension, they get screwed.
So and it's such a dicey thing. So anyway, the point is, I think it's one more reason we see this bigger divide in the haves and the have-nots is the 401k.
So Ron, I do want to kind of make this observation. Kind of, you mentioned about the car, the car as the Henry Ford spread of car from the elites to everybody else. And I think part of that, in that context, I think cars probably increased entrepreneurship on a wide scale, in the sense that if Joe Farmer gets a car, now maybe that increases the productivity of Joe Farmer. Now maybe he can drive the dairy milk a little bit further and get maybe into the city and get a few more, sell it for a few more dollars. And so at least in that context, in 1900, in this industrialization world, the the availability of something like a car as a capital good, flattens out income distribution. But the great capital goods of the 2000 are computers, and you're not going to get Joe Farmer to get a computer and say, oh well, I'm going to use data science to massively increase my yield without any prior training.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that seems more evident is there are entrepreneurial opportunities, but within within any company, you have mechanisms for accounting, you have mechanisms for hiring, you have all these processes, all these things. I don't know of a company that has a mechanism for an individual within it to create wealth, to launch a new product line, to tackle a new market, and potentially, keep 20% of that and give 80% over to the company and the stockholders and such. Those kind of mechanisms, I think we need to create more of as a means to popularize a creation of wealth, and not only create more wealth, but create it in a wider distribution. So, we're seeing issues right now with, we can create wealth, but it's a little bit like you've got a new Uber and you're delivering 100 meals a night. But the problem is there's this one household you deliver 50 meals to, and there's 50 households you're delivering one meal to. It doesn't quite work. And that's sort of where we are with our wealth distribution in the evolution of economics right now. And as long as we have that, it is going to just be inherently problematic. And there's going to be attempts to take wealth and income from people in order to give them to the people at the bottom. And rightfully so, it's something you have to do with that situation. But it seems to me the longer, more sustainable thing is that we peanut butter out, spread out more the ability to create that wealth. So,
well, and in order to peanut butter spread out that wealth, we also got to educate these people on so they can get rid of overcome the fear. Like, I love the idea of your entrepreneurial age that's coming about, but entrepreneurial, inherently means less risk adverse, a little bit more bold, but there's just so much involved. Me being an entrepreneur myself, right? And I am very well versed in the finance world, this and that. I still get terrified every time I'm sitting at that table signing and buying a house or whatever. I'm shaking, and they're like, "Why are you shaking?" And I'm like, "Dude, this is $800,000."
Yeah.
I'm like, and I go, I trust my numbers. I trust myself and the numbers enough to trust the numbers. So even though my fear instinct is saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Worst case, what if we're wrong? What if we lose money? But I'm like, no, I know the numbers don't lie. And yes, there's a probability, but the probability is so small. And does the risk outweigh does the gain outweigh the risk? But another thing, stupid question. Are you guys familiar with Robert Reich?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. He actually
met him once.
Oh, really? Have you seen his documentary Inequality for All?
I've seen lots of clips of his. I don't know that I've seen the whole documentary. Yeah.
Let me
No, I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, this came across my Netflix, For You page or whatever. And I sat down and watched it. And not that I agree with everything he has to say, but let me tell you, he made and showed some very interesting stats that kind of blew my mind. And one of the things that he pointed out was this graph right here from Fred. So, of course, I had to go run on my computer and verify he was telling the truth. And here's the thing that blew my mind. He's after World War II in 1945, everyone comes home. A household income of, $55,000 was enough to support a family of three on one single income, get a car, send your kids to college, the whole nine. Okay. And the median, and then the second thing that was also true at that point was the progressive maximum tax rate was 92%. So we had the largest growth of middle class we had ever seen. Okay. And then as time progresses, it started realizing that as the progressive tax max came down and inflation kept its steady pace at about an average 3%, that all of a sudden the middle class can't afford to be off of one. First, you can't afford to send your kids to college. Then you can't afford to not have your wife work. Then all of a sudden you can't afford to have 3 or 4 kids. So now you only have 1 or 2, which I thought was, mind shattering. But this graph blew my mind because if you don't look at the dollar amount, but you look at the percentages in the last, what is this, 45 years, we've seen a 50% increase, 50% increase in national median income. And I'm like, how the hell does that keep up with inflation? How does that make any sense?
So roughly speaking, inflation roughly doubles every 30 years, just given a 2% target on Fed target. So this kind of basically your median income roughly just kind of roughly keeps tracks with it. So which means you have some marginal increase, roughly speaking, between 1985 to 2020. I mean, and kind of what Robert Reich says is kind of consistent. I mean, in some ways, if you look at Simpsons as a cartoon, and many people have already made this observation that The Simpsons was supposed to be this kind of middle slash lower middle class, but you look at The Simpsons today, and it's a single income family with 3 kids in a car and a house, and that might seem normal in 1985, but now it seems very, very anachronistic. And we see all this, yeah.
Practicality, just stepping back, taking the math out of it. If my
Mhm.
mom and dad were making 55, and this is medium, right? My mom and
Right.
dad were
Yeah,
making
yeah,
50 grand in 85.
yeah.
I think my dad was making like 35. But anyway, 40 years ago, and you're now only making $71,000 a year.
Mhm.
I'm reading that right.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I can't even imagine, I can't approve anyone in California for a loan
Mhm.
on a single income of $71,000. And I don't think what this takes into account either, or puts into perspective, the fact that
This
median
is
income
household, so it's not one
it's
income.
household,
This is
right?
two
Yeah.
people. This is two people making 35.
That's what I'm saying is now it's 30. I mean, it's hidden, right?
Yeah,
At
yeah.
what point in here did the wife or the partner start going to work as well? So
I
I
mean,
think this masks.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, there's a couple things going on, right? So, we talked about women being home, but oh my goodness, the work that you would have done in 1900 at home. In fact, before you had running water and all, women carried tons of water in and out of the house each day, right? You didn't have birth control. You'd have maybe 7 kids. There was just an enormous burden. And so we have lessened that burden at home. And part of this is we have made progress, the standards rise. And I think one thing with mass media that's so, I think, helpful, but also throws things off, people are acutely aware of what the haves have. And it used to be you weren't so aware, right? And you didn't feel this, oh man, I've not got enough. And now, my goodness, you flip on the television, you go look at, anything on the internet, you're going to see, and it's not just that you get to see what people who are okay are getting. You're seeing people who are, I heard a phrase the other day about the haves and the have yachts,
Well, and to your
and
point,
you're seeing those people. And of course, that's not even the top 1%. That's the top one,
no.
100.
But think about
But
it,
that's our standard.
Ron, in the 80s, you're absolutely right, because I thought it was funny that so many people knew who Robin Leach was. And I'm like, how do you know who Robin Leach was? He goes, oh, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, and so I kind of did a little bit of digging in that a long time ago. And I remember finding somewhere where they go, the 80s was defined as the decade of decadence, where everyone was just shop till you drop. I mean, these were the slogans: shop till you drop, credit debt soared. I mean, everyone, I mean, the word yuppie came, into the vocabulary, and Wall Street. I mean, they made movies about being greedy. Greed is good, the famous line from Wall Street.
There's a whole bunch of things. So there's a whole bunch of things happening here, and so yes, no, yes, there is increased income inequality. There's a whole bunch of non-affordability. So all these are true. I want to kind of make mention of this, and I think this is something, if you're American, you kind of, it's hard to kind of internalize, because you don't have baseline relative to the other countries. So if you think about a middle class, it's also imagine, so imagine a middle class family in Taiwan, right? Making 70, 80,000, 90,000, or 100,000, making, single number, their house, or their abode is an apartment that might be, maybe 1,000 square feet, or even if you're in England, you're a solid middle class or even, fairly well off middle class, your house is 1,200 square feet. The average UK family, their energy expenditure is 1/3 of the average energy expenditure of a household. And so, so Homer Simpson in 1985 had um, had this large single family residential with a yard, with the driveway and all that stuff. And in 1985, the United States population was 240. We're now at 320. And at some point, you keep increasing in density. At some point, you're going to have a convergence in terms of the economic viability of what is a middle class house. That's going to be in convergence with the rest of the developed world. And that's in some ways I would make the argument that having the large, the way we think about the trappings of middle class, these large house with a big yard, that's a little bit of an anomaly when you compare it against the rest of the world.
Well, the U.S. is an anomaly compared to the rest.
Right. But that's what I mean is that, and so I would make the argument that, again, like it or not, and I personally would love to have a big place, and it's kind of no one wants to hear this.
But here's the thing, Yang, you can, but you choose not to. And by the way,
but again, this is no one's again. This is no one.
What I'm saying is you have a choice. Back in '85, to your point, my mom and dad, even if they were making 56,000, from a lender's perspective, my mom and dad bought their house in '85 for $110,000.
Right.
Okay. They only put 10%, or they had to put 20% down, which they borrowed from a family member.
Right.
And their mortgage was still like something like $1,300 a month. Okay. But that was at $56,000 a year. Okay. Now, even if we're following this graph and you're making $71,000, but your house is now 800, your purchase price is $800,000, you'd have to, there's just no way to qualify.
No, I totally get that. I get that. So
California, but still.
No, I totally get that. And so yes, and but I think one factor of this is at some point, and then I don't want to say kind of this whole housing density, or I don't want to say that's a beyond and all, but I think that's one factor we kind of at some point I feel like we have to kind of make some have some kind of think about, because our whole residential planning policy is such that again, a typical suburbia in outside of London, our 3,600 square feet suburban house is an equivalent of a 1,200 square feet suburban house in London, and they make comparable income, and this is where we could and I don't want to say this explains everything, but I think that's an element we should think about.
You're forgetting the other practical part of that, right? UK is like what, 1/10 the size of the US?
No, that's completely true.
Population density is like have to have small. They have almost filled up the entire country with homes. But if you look at a map of the US, you can put the entire US population in the upper right-hand corner of Maine and New Hampshire.
So then you're right. U.S. has density, but spread out household means that you have to spend a lot of money on things like roads, infrastructure, public safety provisions, so on and so on and so on and so on. And so as you keep spreading this out, and we need to, you pay the roads and you have to spend money maintaining it. And so all these all play into factor. Again, I'm not saying this explains everything, but
right.
I think that's one factor. Right. That's one factor that also reduces your real income in a very drastic way.
Real income only because your real earned income didn't increase in proportion to everything else.
Yeah, but
like Ron said, the top 1%.
No, and
that's only happened in the last 50 years, because prior to that wasn't the case.
So I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's all true, but I think we have to look, so that is absolutely a big factor. But there are also structural things that
no, and I don't disagree with the structural part. That's inevitable. That's the price we pay for progress. Again, I would argue that you're right. We probably do want a little bit too big of land, but this is actually a good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which you brought up was as far as housing goes. And again, guys, I'm focusing on California because that's what I have experience with. So forgive me if I'm, realizing these are national numbers, not,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm sure the national or the California household income is probably higher. Actually, I know it is, but even Fannie's numbers are crazy. But going back to here in California, um, we're already seeing the triple CI, which is the California Construction Cost Index, starting to come down a little bit, but it's still way over high or way over average. And they're already coming out, builders, and saying, hey, housing starts ain't going to happen, because
Right.
most people don't realize that the builders are also the sellers. So if they can't get the price they want for the houses, they're going to slow down on building. Now, California moved to change the R1 designation and get rid of it to allow people to start building ADUs. And I've heard a lot of talk about this in my real estate conferences and whatnot. But in practicality, talking to people, you start hearing the very famous NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard,
Yes.
right? Hey, and again, I'm going to use some anecdotal evidence. Like, I have a relative who has a apartment complex in his backyard. They're consistently calling me because they refuse to get a property management company, saying, hey, two of my guys haven't paid rent. How can I evict them? And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, you have to, do the whole 3-day notice, to vacate, and then you got to submit it to the courts. And it's now they go, oh yeah, well, I'm not going to give him back his deposit either. And I'm like, well, no, you can't do that. And I'm just kind of like, oh my God, imagine if everyone started building ADUs in their backyard and tried to be,
That's
but
that's actually interesting points. I kind of run as you kind of talk about this kind of democratized entrepreneurship. ADU, I think, in some ways, is a form is kind of one manifestation of this, and
You'd be creating wealth in your backyard.
yeah, and this is where creating the infrastructures that facilitates the provision of these entrepreneurships. How do you
the
make it
government's
easy for
actually subsidizing it, because right now California, Calhafa will give you up to $40,000 to build an ADU to take care of the foundation and all the other stuff.
but as you mentioned, there is the facilitating the building of
Yes.
EDU, but there's also the how do you facilitate
It's
the use of ADUs in entrepreneurship, right? It's renting them out. It's renting them out, comfortable enough to rent them out and know that it will generate income for you with some level of certainty, and you don't have to worry about nightmare scenarios, so on and so forth. And that is an entire institution that you need to build to facilitate these kind of democratized entrepreneurship.
And I think one of the things too, the United States, talking about the square footage being, in the Europe, it's 2/3 the size, the average home, as it is in the States. And one of the reasons for that, you're talking about density, but in the States, our construction of cities and our layout of suburbs was coincident with just cheap gas. So energy prices were low. And so it wasn't a big deal to say, well, somebody will have to drive 20 miles into the city for a job, whatever. And, well, now that's increasingly a factor. And so one of the many reasons that cities are becoming higher and higher priced, and of course, the thing that doesn't get mentioned much is if you're out in a rural area, not so much price rise, right, in homes.
Yeah.
And so people are trying to come into cities, and it's for a variety of things. One is, I remember talking to a guy who did urban planning, and he said one of the catch-22s of urban planning is people often talk about we don't want congestion. But the catch-22 is people like to be where people are. So, you go downtown, you go to a square, we want to be around other people. And this has happened even with homes. And one of the trends that isn't getting mentioned at all is fascinating book from a few years ago called Going Alone, I think is what it's called. And it's about how many people now live alone. And they don't have even one other person in their apartment or home. And what's fascinating is in some of the big cities, it's gone from 1/3 to even close to a half. Stockholm, Sweden, 80% of people live alone. And the structure now is if you're in an urban area, there's two things going on. One, some of these places, you've got it's almost reminds me of a student dorm. So you've got maybe 400 square feet that's your private space, it's your own little cubbyhole. You get a retreat from the world. And then some of the places, you open the door out to a common dining area, and every night there'll be 12 people come from these little 400 square foot rooms into this common area, and you rotate who's cooking, who's washing dishes, and then you get your socializing. And then, of course, you're downtown, like in Stockholm, right? 80% is where they're saying, and you can very easily hit a bar, a club, a restaurant. You can go be with people, but it's your choice. You're not always with people. You're not always alone. You navigate and choose that. And so that's sort of like, to me, one of the things of economic progress is autonomy. People want to be able to do what they want to do, right? And it's one of the reasons that you also see this increase in rights with an increase in income. But what that means is, in my mind, we're going to see more people trying to get into city centers that are high quality of life city centers. And that will mean driving up the price of, real estate in a downtown area. But it'll also be defined, I think, in smaller parcels so that it is affordable for people. And oh, by the way, you'll have more money spent on real estate because you're getting these pricier land, but less money spent on things like commuting and maybe even automobiles, right? Like you just shift away from owning those. So those kind of dynamics, I think, over the next generation will be really fascinating to see if we move in that kind of a direction.
So 3 things I want to say to that, Ron. 1, I have 2 cats, so I don't live alone.
Okay, good.
Okay. And I didn't want to. I only wanted 1. I ended up with 2. Long story.
Johnny, you're just trendy.
Yeah.
You're just
Well,
trendy.
speaking of trends, so you were talking about, and I think we keep using, as analysts, we look at the past to project the future. But given current trends, the number of kids, or I call kids, change that, number of people 30 and younger who still live at home and are unmarried without children is astronomically higher than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
There is no, they're completely fine living in a very small, I don't know if that mentality of big square footage is necessarily going to be the status quo going forward, because these kids aren't, I don't know how many times they're like, oh yeah, I don't need anything big, just me and my dog.
So hypothetically, you buy 2 single-family residentials in San Gabriel, California, right? That's probably half an acre, or maybe a third of an acre. You build 2 ADUs back there. That's a village of 4 boats.
Yeah, but so then here comes my my next point. So, and me and Yang, we've been talking about this for years, and I'm dying to see the numbers for 2022 and 2023. Remote work. Why do people live in urban areas? Because that's where the jobs were. That's not necessarily true anymore.
Yeah,
especially with the advance of remote jobs. I have people now who require remote being part of the job description, or they won't even come interview. And I think
one thing you have to be careful about with that, I've lived in little towns, and how do I put this nicely? Some are incredibly boring places. Like you might have one good restaurant in the whole place. There may be little or no activities, right? So I think one of the things you're going to see increasingly, well, I spent a fair bit of time in Boulder, Colorado, working with a client and traveling out there a lot, just, outside of Denver a little bit, and just a darling area. It kind of reminded me of Santa Cruz in the mountains, and people are very active, and the numbers suggest it's one of the more fit populations, and lots of entrepreneurship and all. But what was fascinating, the city fathers at one point, they were one of the first to articulate this. If you want good businesses and good employees, create a place where the quality of life is such that people who have a choice about where to live want to live there. And so, as you're looking, like, one of the things, Johnny, I think for you to talk to your folks about looking for homes and all is, be careful about short-term optimization on things like price, or even, to your point, commute distance, because that could change. When you buy something, you could imagine somebody, for no other reason than this is such a great neighborhood, or the quality of life is so good, or whatever it is, they would choose to buy there. And then what can happen is the home price may not even go up over the next 25 years, but if you're suddenly getting income for this ADU in the backyard, you know, that could conceivably be paying your mortgage in 10 years. And so, one, you've got a place where there's demand for it. And two, the thing people forget, if you're waiting, sitting on a house for 10, 20 years and hoping it goes up in value, you're still spending a huge portion of your life living in some place that hopefully you enjoy.
Yes.
You can go, I don't know, go to the Rose Bowl or ice hockey or whatever, you know, and it's all there, or go over to the beach, right? That is going to determine our, you know, just the day-to-day mundane kind of, I'm happy. So I think that's one thing, Johnny, as you talk to your folks, you know, take in consideration mortgage. Take in consideration what's happening with housing prices. But the punchline is this payment sustainable? Will I be happy living here?
So
And those are the quality of life things.
I'll throw this out for you, Ron. What do you think the likelihood that we ever see a dacha system in the US? A dacha system as in kind of out in Russia, everybody has an apartment in the cities because that's where they work, and on the weekend they have a cottage out, you know, out in the countryside. And so you know, that's how they optimize their housing housing consumption.
They do that in Mexico.
So you know what instantly comes to mind when you say that?
What?
If we get and I know I'm way idealistic on this. I still think nuclear fusion is a possibility over the next decade or two. But if we can get energy prices down and we have electric cars with that, I think that kind of thing would just be very common. You know, imagine a self-driving car with little marginal cost for the fuel. You nap on your commute out from the city where you're all busy and bustling and working and enjoying, and you go out to your little cabin or whatever, and you take a nap for the 2 or 3 hours of that, and then you're enjoying.
I literally asked my CEO. No, I literally asked my CEO what he thinks, our CEO, what he thinks, kind of whether, you know, when he thinks something like that will happen. The timeline's anywhere between 10 and 20 years, and I would love to be able to, you know, leave my office on a Friday, hop on my autonomous electric car, and then wake up, you know, at my little cabin near Yosemite. I would love to have something like that.
Ron, I gotta throw this in there. Me as your local technophile, I'm gonna tell you right now, the amount of research and money that's being dumped into fusion and how close we are. I mean, we've already sustained it for 90 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long, but the fact that it was able to be sustained for that long is a huge thing. The MIT studies that came out where they were able to create a solar cell that captured over 50% of the energy that it was. I mean, it's not commercialized yet. They're still able to, you know, mimic photosynthesis basically. And that's going to revolutionize solar. And the amount of money that's being dumped into batteries, where I believe they came up with a new material that's even going to be better than lithium, that to store. Not to mention, I was just reading an article yesterday about how electric vehicles can actually save the energy grid because they just act as portable batteries that can feed back into the system as well as put back. Think about it. If you're plugging your car in your garage and it's already full, you know, and then say the grid needs a little bit more, we'll pull some out of your car, you know.
And this is a perfect segue to, you know, I'm wildly optimistic about the future, and big part of that's because I'm a history buff and I know how dramatically life has improved, right? So here's one thing to think about, right? With what the possibility you just laid out. One of the things I love about things like fusion or, you know, solar that's cutting edge, what you're doing is your energy is dependent upon knowledge. And knowledge is a win-win. It develops as the three of us exchange stuff, right? You say something, Johnny, Yang says something. It sparks another idea. It gives me some more information, something to process, makes my world view a little more complex and rich. And we all three walk away, and hopefully anybody listening to this walks away, little richer worldview. Knowledge is the ultimate kind of win-win. I share, you share, we share ideas, and we walk away. Now compare that with land. Compare that with the petro empires of Saudi Arabia or Russia, where you've got these kind of dictators, because there it's about power. It's about zero sum. I got to keep this oil. You can't. I'm going to sell it out at a price that, you know, will make me rich. And it's a perfect little segue to serendipitous thing. I'm wandering around in the Belvedere Museum today in Vienna, and it's just gorgeous works of art. And anyway, I end up in like a 20-minute conversation with a guy who is an IMF. He has the Russia desk.
Oh wow. Well,
And he was talking,
the Russian
it was fascinating. And so one of the things though that
what's the
he
Russian
had,
desk?
that's
so
a IMF.
basically it's his,
That's his specialty.
yeah, he studies Russia. It's his job to
Russia
make
economy.
forecasts about
Yeah.
Russia's economic, political activities and what the ripple effect.
Yeah.
And one of the points he made that just kind of scary, he said, you know, Putin can't lose this war, like in terms of his own capital within political capital within Russia. And, you know, he said it really makes him uneasy to see what could happen with that and what that could mean. And when I was flying over here, I ended up next to an executive from a company in Berlin. And he was talking, I was asking about the oil price, and, you know, their energy prices have just shot up, right? And his take on it was, he said, well, you know, this is not easy. It's hard for us. But I think if we get this resolved before spring, by March or April, we'll make it through this. But if it goes beyond that, we're going to have some really serious consequences. So there are these situations that don't have to do with economic potential in reality. They have to do with political disruption of those economic economies. And so part of what's beautiful is if you can get beyond the dependence on things like oil that now I can control and zero sum in its mind to things that are dependent on knowledge and development of understanding and all, you're shifting the world enormously and shifting the way the power works. So, you know, that's not going to help us by spring. But that is, again, a part of why I'm optimistic about the future, because I do see that happening. But one more little tremor in terms of economic possibilities.
So I want to, I'm you know, I'm going to throw this out. So try to kind of game plan the future, how you would imagine the future. Let's just assume that 5 years from now, again, just as 5 years from now, we have autonomous driving, we have cheap fusion energy. Let's just say we have those two. How do you think the world will change? Off the top of my head, I can see, let's suppose this facilitates a hub and spoke center city dacha system. And one, you know, and if you think through kind of this percolation of effect, is that creates a much more direct economic conduit between city and rural area. And if you think about the political, fault lines, you know, the city and the countryside have always been at odds. They've always had different cultural value, different cultural norms. But in industrial times, there's some sort of understanding that there's some sort of codependence.
Common fate.
The codependence, right? You know, the farm that you grow the food, you can't make any money unless the people in the city folks. And I feel that in some ways, that sense of being in the same boat together has kind of frayed. And so
that's such a great point.
And maybe having this kind of, and so, you know what, if you're in the countryside, you have people coming in on the weekends and they show up at your country diner, there's much more to say, okay, wait, maybe we don't agree with each other, but at the end of the day, we kind of need you to you know, to I
love that. Yeah.
Kind of jump to kind of sustain as a conduit of kind of how resources and money flow in. And that my reduce the temperature in the economic temperature.
Not just economic. I think to your point and to Ron's point about cultures and
political divide.
Yeah.
Not only that, you got people who don't have the opportunity to actually talk to each other. They only see what they see on social media, right? And come on, we both know hyperbole, fear, and anger sell way better on social media than anything else. So, I mean, you ask someone under the age of 25, you know, what the big difference between a Republican and a Democrat is, you're going to hear two extreme opposites, because to them, there's no one in the middle. The middle doesn't exist. And I think if you have people going out to the countryside and like you said, going to that diner, just like Ron had that random conversation with the guy from the MMF at the or the IMF at the thing, these conversations, I think it'll find the country.
And I think this is one of the things that if you look at the mobility data, right, United States is still fairly mobile relative to the rest of OECD, but we're increasingly more staying put. There's a lot less, hey, I grew up in this little town, I moved to a city, and vice versa.
Are you saying like living or moving away from
moving? So you're moving
okay.
from where you're born, and so you know, if you live in a little town and nobody and everybody you know hasn't moved anywhere, hasn't come back, you know, what someone can say, well, you know what, did you know that? Did you know that Manhattan, people just get straight up murdered in Manhattan, even though you're something like a quarter more, you're less likely to be murdered in Manhattan than you are in half the states. Again.
And the red states, they don't know that San Francisco gets more venture capital than any other country. They just know there's human feces on the
Right.
sidewalk.
And so this is where you need someone to say, hey, and this is where I do feel a little bit of physical movement of people, because in some ways when if in this hypothetical, as well, whenever if I show up Saturday in my little cottage up in let's say up in up in Yolo County, where it's ruby red, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm in some ways I'm going to represent, because I'll eat at the diner. They'll say, hey, what do you, is that, are you escaping the hellscape? I'm like, oh no, like it's, I went to, I walked around in LA County, and I caught I went and caught a musical up at Disney Hall, and everything's perfectly fine. Again, they need someone, again, when you have someone, giving first person kind of testimonies to different things, that probably is a big deal.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. I was talking to a woman from Hungary today, and I was talking about Orban. He's one of these scary, fairly conservative right-wing guys. And I said to her, I said, well, what is the divide politically? Is it age? She says, pretty much Budapest and everywhere else. And so it's an urban rural divide. And it's exactly your point. We live different realities and we vote different realities. And what we know about the other side is, all these horror stories. One comical little thing. So yesterday, as I'm wandering around Vienna, I'm at the Cultural Museum, which was just extraordinary. And just across from it, there were these guys protesting. And of course, it's all in German. I don't know what's going on. And so I asked the woman who was buying my tickets, I said, what's the protest? And she says, we're trying to figure out what they're protesting, but I do have to apologize for their very poor taste in music. They were blaring things over the speakers. And then I'm coming back and I saw a protest, and it was actually for the Iranian regime. And it was against, the Islamic imperialism and the hijab, right, and the whole issues in Iran. And there's enough of a Muslim population, right, in Austria, that there was this big street protest. And then, and all this is like within 2 kilometers, right? And then there's like pounding of drums and bullhorns and people shouting. And of course, it's again in German. And I asked the doorman as I go in, I said, what are they protesting? And he says, oh, it's economics, it's inflation and everything else. And I said, I had no idea Austrians protested so much. And he was so embarrassed. He says, no, this is not normal. This is, and I said, in the States, we do all our protests online. We don't get out in the streets. We just post angry things.
Like I said, the internet took the guy off the milk carton, standing on the corner, put him in front of everyone else. Actually,
but the point is, the world is angry, right? And they're aware. And you're getting these kind of protests. And Yang's point too, it's such a great one. If you don't know people who are in that other world, oh my goodness, it's so easy to, and of course, there's always fringes on both sides that if you hear anything they say, all you do is walk away convicted they're nuts. And so, just to talk to a normal person, it just doesn't happen across the divides.
Oddly enough, and I know this is going to shock you guys, I don't mind talking about the 3 things that people say don't talk about, politics and sex, to complete strangers. And I think because we need to talk about those things, because that's where the biggest divide is. And I'm like my family, I grew up a very fundamentalist Catholic. My family's very involved in the church and all of it. And we grew up as Republicans, but we grew up as what I call one-issue Republicans. We had to vote Republican because they were pro-life. I could disagree, and they do, with every other point the Republicans had, but they couldn't vote for a Democrat because they're pro-choice. And as I grew up older, of course, I got, educated, and I have had many conversations with my mother about this, to the point where now she'll vote for whoever she thinks as a whole is a better person. But she doesn't seek, she'll come over here and pull me to the side, voted for a Democrat. And I'm like, why are you whispering? And she goes, I don't want anyone else to know. And I'm like, it's self-conscious. It's crazy. But what dawned on me.
And now you're just putting out on the internet, Johnny. Oh my, you're revealing your mother's secrets.
Yeah, well, this was years ago. I don't know how she votes now, but most of them just call me and go, hey, who should I vote for? And I'm like, don't, that defeats the purpose of democracy. But what I realized after talking to all these people about these different things, that 90%, the vast majority of what we agree on outweighs the 4 or 5 things we disagree on. Yeah. But it's just those 4 or 5 things that get so amplified and riled up and thrown in your face. And like you said, you're a nut job. You're a liberal ultra guy because you believe in Social Security. And I'm like, I believe that people I'm like, unless you're going to start letting people die in the hospitals or killing them off, we have a responsibility to take care of each other. Just stay. Yeah. Oh, you freaking liberal, you want socialism. And I'm like, apparently me and you don't know what social or have a different idea what socialism is, but but I think we're more alike than we are apart. And I think like to Yang's idea of that, which I hope it's true, might bring us back together. But first, the baby boomers have to, hand off their wealth to the rest of us, and importantly to their kids, and their kids need to know what to do.
Is this a stick up, Johnny?
Something like that. Something like that. I'm just looking at this graph, going, man, they have so much wealth.
Well, okay. So hold on. So I want to kind of, I want to bring it back. So again, that was one possible future, right? With that given, with the, I want to kind of just throw this out, you guys. How would you envision future? Because let's just have these as givens, right? Let's give it as premises. In this premises, how will things change? Because it's easy to say, well, there's the technological side, but the larger social institutional changes, that's kind of, I think that's something I want to think about. So again, in this future world, hypothetically, 5 years from now, we got fusion, we got cheap energy, we got self-driving cars, we got all these, because these things will fundamentally change how we live.
Let's see here. So
my only caveat on that is history is phenomenal in the changes it brings, and almost inevitably it takes a little longer than you think.
Well,
fusion, I can see within a year or two that they finally go, we got it. Like to Johnny's point about this, more energy out than in, like they're already doing experiments to get that. But then to put that on the grid and then turn that into actual lower priced energy, that could easily be an infrastructure build out that could take a decade or two. But
but just assuming that's all done, again, just assuming. I think I want to think about how that impacts how we live, because that's and that's because the social changes is going to be the driving factor of how society will be kind of reorganized and rewired.
I think you're absolutely right, and here's my 2 cents. So in 5 years it'll be 2027. Okay, I tell everyone, because they start talking about this being the digital era or the digital age, and I'm like the internet age, and I'm like, I don't think the real internet age started until around 2007, even though we had the internet in the 90s, only because that's when you had the advent of the iPhone, right? Which is basically the internet in your pocket. Whereas before that, BlackBerry, this and that, and not only the internet in your pocket, what I mean is social media in your pocket, right? You had Facebook and Instagram, and then Twitter came out a couple of years later. So the generation who has lived in the internet age hasn't come into adulthood yet, but by 2027 they will have, right? 2027, so they'll be 20 years old. Okay? Those people have known nothing but this. Let me tell you from my experiences, because I still talk to my younger whatnot, like those guys understand better what the internet is and what trolls are and what bullying is and and have adapted to it better than our generation or the generation behind us have, because they still think back like the 80s and 90s and are, they don't understand how technology works. They don't understand how things can get amplified. They understand what viral means. They understand. So my hope, I'm very hopeful for the future, because I believe as that generation comes in, they're also some of the most politically active generations we've seen in a while.
So you're saying us Gen Xers just need to get off the bus?
Basically, shut up and die.
So the baby boomer listening here is thinking, wait a minute, if you guys are obsolete.
Hey, there's a whole meme about you guys. Okay, boomer, you know?
Well, you think about, what, like all my knowledge in college about how to use a phone modem, they're all completely useless now.
Yeah.
How many typing classes did I take in third through high school trying to get my 30 words per minute, certification? And now my entire text messages are emojis and K, CYA, and I'm just like, we don't even spell the full words anymore, let alone grammar. But yeah, no, I'm very hopeful for the future. I'm just more concerned about this wealth different, because I mean, I couldn't find any data on it. And I'm pretty bummed about it, but I wanted to know of this wealth that the baby boomers have, how much of it is tied up in like not just property, but multiple properties, right? Investment properties. Like, as these people start, are handing off their properties to their descendants, and what are those descendants going to do? Before the podcast started, I was asking Yang if he knew anywhere where I could find that data, and
So
it
so
doesn't exist.
there is a question. So I don't know the answer, but this is just conjecture, right? So if you live in the city, so I'll give you an example. I have a college friend. He grew up in the Bay Area, went to college together, and he got his engineering degree. And he talks about that. He was saying how he and his high school friends, none of them can ever move back to the Bay Area because again, their parents, they retired, sold the house, and now has a nice place, out in Costa Rica or whatever. And he half jokingly says like the only way I can ever move back to the Bay Area is if I see a 7.8.
A 7.8.
If a 7.8 drives down the property value and he can actually finally like afford a place back in the Bay Area. And I have a sense that because as a straight up property transfer, I feel like my conjecture is that relatively speaking, that's going to happen in the suburbs or more in the rural area, but in like the city in Manhattan's, like it's hard now when you retire, there's a very strong sense of, dude, like I've been paying all this money and pay all these money and send my kids to college and rack up all this debt. I need to sell off the house and take my equity and go live in Costa Rica. Again, I have no idea if that's true, but that's just my conjecture.
So what I sent you here, this is the top 1% over time, what portion of net worth they have. And these aren't all boomers, Zuckerberg would be in this group, right? But you can see it just steadily goes up. So back in the late 90s, right, kind of, or early 90s, we're talking about under a quarter, and now we're getting close to a third. So rise from about 23 to nearly 33. And then if you just type it on the search bar, or click on that other link there, Johnny, for the bottom 50%, and just, in fact, hit the edit graph on this button right here. Add a line, that button up in the middle, add a line at the very top.
No, very top, very top.
Yeah, add a line, and then key in there, and what I want you to pop in is bottom 50%. That should do it. And then there we are. So hit that, click on the total wealth held by the bottom 50%, add the data series. And now
you need to have a two.
How did you go millions? Go back to percent. Instead of millions there, change, no, where it says millions of dollars, change that to percent. No,
you have to get rid of the line, because one is total, the other one is total, the other one's percent.
One share of the total. Yeah. So what you want is
find the one that's a share. So do an add line and do the same thing, but look for the share.
So bottom 50, you could just type bottom 50, and then share. There it is. Second one. Yeah, beauty.
Add data series.
On that. And now what you're looking at is I think it's extraordinary graph. So go ahead and close that out. The blue, this represents 1 out of 100 Americans, their share of all wealth. It's risen from about under 25% to nearly 33%. Meanwhile, if you hover over it, you can see the good news is the bottom 1% starting to rise, but it fell. Look at that. It was below 1%. So we're talking about 30% versus 0.3% right there where you're at. And that's for half So again, going back to my analogy, imagine that you had a food delivery service and you served 100 meals a night. The bad news is there's one household that got 30 of the meals, and there's 50 of the households that had to share one.
So,
You would say there's something wrong with my meal delivery service. And that's kind of where we're at in history in terms of our ability to create and distribute wealth more broadly. And that to me is the central question. How do you make wealth creation more common? And that's part of this popularization of entrepreneurship. How do people learn how to do that? And we make that part of the mainstream as opposed to something that people outside the system learn to do.
So my expectation is that the bottom 50, that share of 50% is going to go down the next 5 years, because the biggest component of the bottom 50% is going to be their home equity.
I was going to say, this is fake.
Well, it's not fake per se, but if you go back to 2010.
Well, let me challenge that, Yang.
What
percentage of what percentage of people own versus rent? Would you have 50% who are renting?
Usually homeownership rate is around, it's between 65 and 70.
Oh, it is that high. Okay.
It's 65, give or take. It's give or take 65%.
Okay.
Now it has gone down renting, but I believe the majority and this data, this homeowner share, this data was like 5-6 years ago. But it's my guess is still kind of in the 60% range. It might have gone up because maybe a bunch of
it's guaranteed above 50.
But I, so I think, but if you hover over like 2011, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is my guess, like 2011, this 0.4%, what's going to happen is that this 0.4% is driven a lot of in large part by a lot of people with negative equity. And so you have a ton of people with negative wealth.
And upside down properties.
Right. So if you're here, if you have, if Yang has a negative equity of 100,000, and then he's got 5 friends that has an equity of, they just have to net out to 0, then the share of total wealth is going to be 0%.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I looked it up and it confirmed it's close to 2/3. Yeah. I didn't realize the home ownership was that high.
Well, home ownership in the sense that I always feel like home ownership has to have a little bit of asterisk, because you owe the bank money, so you don't own the home outright.
Are you paying mortgage or are you paying rent?
Yes. I mean, there are obviously within that 6%, there are some non-trivial percent where they own the homes outright, obviously, but majority of those homeowners are still paying mortgages. Right.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And so, and that's one of the reasons the bottom 50% are negative. There's student loans, there's mortgage, what do you owe on the home versus those kind of things. And when you look at the net, it's hard to, struggle up there. But the punchline still is we do have some people who are absolutely positioned better than any generation in history to create wealth. And then a lot of us who are still, trying to afford the Model T, right?
Right. Well, but I think this is one of the things. So yes, that's absolutely true. Also, it's this kind of and again, I've been, it's this this dissemination of financial products, which means that the bottom 50%, are more prone to kind of these kind of swings, these kind of equity swings, and that has its own long-term social and cultural impact.
Yeah, definitely, and it's part of that. One of the more brilliant phrases to come out of the last quarter century, maybe the last decade, the precariat, people who are precariously living in economic wealth situations where like there could be 2 or 3 months away from homelessness.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is just such a stressful, scary thing.
Yeah.
And going full circle back to, politics, when you're in the precariat, you're ready to protest, you're ready to be angry, you're ready to vote for the guy who's going to stick it to you and not be all that concerned about the nuance of whether he's going to be good or bad for the system. In fact,
break out the pitchforks.
Yeah, and maybe we blow up the system because it doesn't seem to be working for me, right?
Yeah.
And those of us who go, it's kind of hard to reassemble a system when it's blown up, it's scary. And what's fascinating is without revealing sources, this guy who's kind of in the, he's seen things that are scaring him, like this could become a big deal over the next few years, depending which way politics go and all right.
Yeah, I can see
And
that.
and what happens there. So we are the good news is we have so much potential, and I think Yang and I share a lot of optimism. Johnny, you as well, right? But the other thing that people tend to forget about, like what happened there between the late 30s and up till about 79, that came out of a world war, a devastating world war and a Great Depression. Like that transition was not fun. And a similar kind of thing, like I believe what Lincoln and the New Republicans did in the late 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, that came out of a civil war that was just devastating. And even our founding of the country, where we shift from the expectation that you be like a serf to no, you're going to be your own landowner, you're going to be a farmer. That came out of an American Revolution, which when you look at it casually, it's obvious we beat the British Empire. Of course we did. We're Americans. But my goodness, no smart money would have bet on that outcome, right?
No.
And it was protracted.
Yeah.
And it was nerve-wracking. So, these transitions, they're like in a system, they're called a bifurcation, where the system can either rise to the next level or it can collapse, right? And there's little elements of both in that transition. So people who are positioned well, one of the phrase I heard once, the optimists always win in the long run. If you're pessimist and you protect yourself, you also miss out on returns.
Yeah.
You miss out on risk, right? And so you kind of have to be ready for these whitewaters. And
I will say this. I have friends in politics that give me a lot of relief when they tell me things. Look, when we're in front of a camera or a news reporter, we say one thing. We have a face we have to present to the public, to our base. But behind closed doors, when we're negotiating things, we're a lot more logical people. That's not all of them, right? But more importantly, now that we're but the other thing I've noticed too is that even countries now, because we've been a global country or global civilization for a long time, but no more so than now, because we are so intertwined with each other. I can't imagine all these countries who keep claiming they want the US to go down, but in the back saying, dude, if the US collapses, we're screwed. I mean, if any country of any of the major top 5, industrial countries were to collapse, it would destroy the entire economic system, I believe. I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, I make fun of people who are like, they go, weren't you worried about January 6th and those people taking over the government? I'm like, if you think 2,000 guys with yelling can take over the US Army, I'm like, we got bigger problems. Thankfully we didn't have to call the US Army. But let's take the worst case example where the system does collapse or in the verge of collapse, and I don't know, the military. I would think that the rest of the world would get behind us going, no, get the hell out of here. We're gonna keep this. Better to have the devil than the devil you don't.
Well, I generally agree with. There's this wonderful thing. I think it was a line of Steinbeck's, Hemingway, maybe. Anyway, that when it comes to bankruptcy, nothing happens for the longest time, and then suddenly it does.
They're very slowly, very slowly, then all at once.
Yeah, there you go. Brilliant. Yeah. And so I do think these system changes, whether you're talking about political systems, financial markets, there's a degree of that, right? Where it's sort of like, look, status quo, kaboom. And that's not inconceivable.
I personally don't think we want to be in a position where we kind of basically tread water, because that's when you when everything falls apart. I mean, look, the Soviet Union is just one example, but if you look at, for example, historically, you can think about the Byzantine Empire, or where it just kind of hangs on and basically is a zombie, and everybody's trying to keep it together, or even the Ottoman Empire, right? You just kind of try to keep it together, and at some point, I think we Americans tend to think of tend to benchmark revolutions to our own, and you think this glorious and stuff like that. But a lot of the revolutions, there's a lot of suffering. Like there's a lot of suffering.
I tell everyone, I'm like,
you think about the Chinese Revolution, and you have, you think, oh yeah, it's great that it ushered in the modern age and it transitioned from 2000 imperial system, but that also accompanied with entire group of people being massacred, when
Yeah.
because the Manchus who were again, and they just, the entire village got slaughtered. These things are
So
very, very, these sufferings are very real.
Well,
So I saw this statue of Franz Joseph, right? He was the Austrian Empire emperor, pretty much during a period of growing nationalization. And his heir apparent was Franz Ferdinand, who a teenager assassinated to set off World War One.
Mhm.
Right. And that's one of those things that, yeah, but a chance he was anyway. But the point being that, when a system gets to a point of change, it's an inflection point. Seemingly small things can finally reveal these structural changes that have been brewing, right?
You're absolutely.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say two things to that. One, and because of that, I agree. The system needs a shock, but I think one big giant shock or collapse is not going to happen. But I think it's already starting to get shocked. Two things that I've come to realization. One, because we never have term limits, how many senators and reps have been in there for 30, 40 years? Most of them are on their way out. Okay, hopefully. Now, who we get to replace them? The fact that we have, in the last 5 years, started to embrace, I mean, I know there's now a transgender that was elected. I know you have AOC. I mean, that one blew my mind in New York, a 25-year-old, or was she 29-year-old or something to that effect, was elected to the House of Representatives. That in and of itself doesn't sound like a big deal, but because we're in a social media kind of world now, these guys are becoming the new champions. But more importantly, they're becoming and showing the generation behind us, hey, we can get in there and make change. I'm hoping they see that we could go in there and get out these people and replace them with someone like us, rather than, hey, there's nothing we can do. Even when we try, we can't get who we want in there. And the system, so we need to reboot the system.
So I do think, I do think, I do think that we may have too much gerontocracy, but I think you have to balance that against institutional memory. And so for example, the old guards like John McCain and this idea of kind of institutional continuity and and so the benefits of getting in young Turks is that you have people who are very passionate and they want to get things done. The problem with getting young Turks is that they're gonna half of them want to burn the whole thing down. And again, pros and cons.
But to your point though, I think there are a couple of changes that are inevitable. I think in the politics realm of things, I mean term limits. I mean, I think they have to be implemented at some point. I mean, we cannot, to your point about institutional knowledge, we need new knowledge and new.
That's a good point. And that is actually a very good point because, when we're having, when you have ranking committee members on technology, trying to rule on things that they don't know. And I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree that I think that is but again,
the internet is a series of tubes.
Right.
Yes.
But again,
interwebs.
But I think that is a but I think this is where I think this is the answer somewhere in the middle. I feel like.
I think it's going to take time, but I think little by little we're going to
I agree.
We're going to start picking out away at the current system. We've already started. The reason it got this bad is because I was having this conversation with someone the other day. I'm like, the Republicans had the best marketing strategy of all time. They go, what do you mean? Since the 1970s, they convinced a large portion of the U.S. public to say that you need to hate the government because they're trying to steal your guns or change your religion, or B, the government, you don't matter to them. The government's too big, so don't even vote because why bother? Your vote doesn't count. And those two groups of people were large enough, my mom and me and my family being one of them, the amount of my family saying, why should I vote? Okay, midterm elections, why would I vote? It doesn't matter anyway. Presidential election, I'm voting Republican because I have to be pro-life.
So how about this? How about this as I would say maybe if we do something along this line, the House of Representatives, you reallocate. So let's suppose let's say you have 400 for all the states. You apportion them, you reapportion them, and then you leave 35 of them. You have 35 of them, they run, but their constituents aren't by state but by age group. So you have two representatives for people born between 1970 1980, and you two of them have for between, so on and so forth.
I'm just
um, so that you have demographic, you have age cohort specific political representatives.
I'm just saying that the younger generations are now more politically active than, I mean, our generation was. I don't know about, I mean, I know us.
Well,
but
no, but this is an idea to kind of like balance out the gerontocracy.
And I think it's a brilliant idea. The inventors create new products, new technologies, right? Entrepreneurs, they create new social systems, right? And the most obvious kind of entrepreneurs, you start a business. But one of the reasons I think, when I come to Europe, like there's just less and less interest in religion, and there is in the States too, but it's still much higher. And one of my theories about why the States has higher levels of religion than Europe is, you go back to like 60s, I think it was, even maybe into the 70s, but in Denmark, you paid to the church, the state church, and everybody paid a portion of the tax. And pretty much it was binary. You were either that or you were nothing. And a lot of people decided to become nothing. Well, in the States, oh my goodness, we are so entrepreneurial when it comes to religion. Mormon church was an American invention, the Southern Baptist American religion, right? We've got Scientology. There's all these. So there are so many ways to become religious that it's no wonder in my mind that more Americans are. And then, of course, a lot of these new entrepreneurs, I think, for religion, it's not even clear they have any kind of a denominational or any kind of a divine kind of philosophy. It's very much kind of a blend of like the Covey feel good with, kind of a God loves you. And it's effective, right? So a lot of people do that. But anyway, the punchline here is, when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's not just starting a business, it's social invention and getting right to Yang's point. Things like, how do you create a legislative body people trust? One of the biggest crises we have that I don't think gets nearly enough mention, if you look at the Gallup poll of people's trust in institutions and its church and its government and its universities and its media, you name it, it has fallen about 70% since 79, 60% maybe since 79. There's been, and without institutions, you don't have a modern society, because you can't do it with tribal alliances and friendships. And so to me, that's like necessary. And part of what Yang's talking about, like, if you saw yourself in the representatives in Congress because they were your age, you trust the institution more, right? And anything we can do to both create the image of I can trust it and the reality of it's responsive to me, any of these institutions, I think it will lead to greater contentment and actually make all those institutions more effective too, because then they'd have to be responsive to real people's real needs. So
and the scary part about that is the people who do trust their local Congress, whatever it is, will eat up whatever they say as being doctrine, whatever. And I think the other biggest issue, other than the term limits, which I think we can all agree, is money in government, because now the corporations can buy that politician to say what they want to say, which their constituents will take as doctrine. And I believe that has influenced so many things in this country. I mean, the things that get that thrown back at me, that I'm like, where did you get that from? And they're like, I'm like, again, going back to, I still think it's funny, but I mean, hearing my friends and family telling me, yeah, did you hear the government's trying to get us to get fired? And I'm like, wait, what? And talking about inflation and this and that. And I'm like, where did you hear that? Oh, so-and-so was, on Tucker Carlson the other day. And I'm like,
and what's so bizarre about it, there's a measure of truth. It's one of our very first conversations we had on this podcast, right? Was, well, the Fed is trying to bring down aggregate demand, and that will mean potentially higher unemployment, which.
But understanding, I mean, I think what I get so frustrated with is that, to this whole binary concept that everyone tries to do, they try to make everything binary. I mean, do you understand the complexities of economics? Even when you go to school, there's a macroeconomics and there's a microeconomics. Even in physics,
But-
there's a quantum physics.
So we'll have to. For me, well, we can talk about that in our next podcast
Yeah.
because I do have to take off.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I just
Thanks,
realized.
gentlemen.
All right, guys.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. To sum it up, baby boomers are gonna hand over a lot of wealth. What we do with it, God only knows. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next time. Have a good one, guys.
All right.
It's like,
Checks in the mail from the boomer.
All right.
Bye.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening in this week to the Real Geek Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe so you can stay up to date on any new episodes. This is Johnny Garcia in the Real Geek Podcast studio saying it's just math and science. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.